and send it out as a follow-up, just so you have record of it and record of the conversations. For those of you who have never been through Zoom before or a webinar, I'm going to start out with some basic functions of the platform, because we use this quite a lot at the ISD, and I think sometimes we take it for granted that not everybody knows how it functions. So right now I am actually on 2 devices. I'm monitoring the chat room, which I'll show you where that's at in just a minute, as well as my own device that's recording, and hopefully y'all can see me because I do have my video going. So just some common functions with Zoom on your end. You will find that down at the bottom, or it might even be at the top of your screen. You're going to see where you can actually view participants. You should be able to, when you click on this, you'll be able to see who's joining us. Everybody comes in automatically muted though, because have you ever been on one of those awful webinars and you hear that screeching noise? That's because people are not muting their devices correctly. So if you are in a group, and I see that some people are sitting in a group, Nicole, Brian, Hannah, and Jamie from the township, looks like Vicki, Lisa, and Amy at White Pine. If you are joining us and all of you have your devices on, right, and somebody's not muted correctly, it's crazy screechiness. So just make sure that you enter rooms muted, and that you only have one device if you have multiple devices providing the audio. Otherwise, you get some crazy background noise as well. So hopefully everybody can hear me. If you can't hear me, or if there's a challenge, you can either unmute yourself in the participants section. So if you click on participants, this is where you can control your muting. If you want, and this is what most people prefer, especially when we're going through kind of like a large webinar, you can click on the chat and you can send me a message. I am monitoring it. So if you have questions, or if you can't hear me, or if you're having technical difficulties, sometimes I'll throw links in here as well so you can access it. But this is the chat room. You can also chat with people privately. So let's say, for example, Angie Adams is right here, highlighted on the screen. She's actually off-site. She's not with me today, but if you have a question explicitly for Angie Adams, our MTSS coach, you can just click on her name and send her a private message, and it will go directly to her. So throughout the session today, just some of those basic functions. The ones that you're going to use the most are to unmute yourself. You click on participants, like I said, and you can unmute yourself. You can also throw things up in the chat room. I am going to be popping everybody into breakout rooms at some point, so you're going to get some collaborative time. This is interactive, so I have sat on many a webinar where you are, oops, sorry, jumping the gun here, where you can literally sit and bypass and multitask, right? I sat in one yesterday, the 31A webinar from MDE. I was able to get a ton of stuff done while listening. This is not that type of webinar. You will be asked to, jump in the chat room. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms where you guys will actually get to talk to each other and take notes. So just some basic etiquette when you are on a Zoom. If you don't want your video showing, that's totally fine. You are not required to, you don't have to. However, if you do, we like to say your square is your chair. So just remember that people can see you and your facial expressions. Mute and unmute, feel free to use those functions when you need to. If you have a question, don't be scared to unmute yourself and ask that question. Or if you want me to unmute you because you're not sure how, just holler at me and I can unmute you on my end as well. So those are just some basic etiquette pieces, and that awful screeching, that's probably the worst one, right? So as I'm looking at who's jumping on in our Zoom, like I said, I see we have the township. Angie Adams is also online. Like I said, she's off-site. She had a training today. Latoya is here from the Saginaw City. Shauna, I'm going to assume that Shauna Gruel, but I'm not 100% sure. From St. Charles, it looks like we have Carolyn Collard from Chesaning. Beth from St. Charles looks like is joining us, and Julie. So this is a good group. And let's see, Julie, where are you from? Saginaw Public as well, Thompson. Awesome. I'm super glad to have all of you here. I am recording this, and like I said, I am going to be bouncing you into break rooms. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to be talking about team-based leadership at the secondary level. We're going to be talking about how that connects to the MyKIP work. What I love about being able to see who is in the chat room is I can also see who was part of MyKIP on Monday. There's going to be some overlap. Like you guys can see on your screen, there was, hold on one sec. There we go. There was, we talked about tiered delivery system and whole child on Monday at the MyKIP meeting with the district level teams. How we view you guys are, you are building level teams, right? Like, how are you going to make movement now in your building? So there is going to be some natural overlap, but I want everybody to know it is not going to be repetitive. It is not going to be, we're focusing solely on secondary, the secondary world, which kind of boils down to our last learning target, right? What does this mean for our world? And so that's what we're really going to focus on brainstorming on and talking about and learning about. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself at any time, or you can throw it in the chat box. So yesterday I sat through a 31A legislative update, and what was fascinating to me was there was really no update. We are on the right track. There's not a whole lot new. And so, but they did throw this graphic back up. And so when we're talking about MTSS at the secondary world and creating an implementation checklist, we're going to talk a little bit about setting the vision for MTSS. So that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Last time we got together, we kind of talked about the big picture, right? And how we do the improvement process around MTSS. Today, it's a lot of visioning and kind of really getting a clear idea of what needs to happen in our world. We are going to talk a little bit about data, but not a whole lot. And we are going to really talk about this idea of academics and behavior and how it all comes together. That's where that tiered system comes in. So just letting you know on that implementation checklist where we are headed. Just as a reminder, when it comes to MBE's model for MTSS, we're going to talk about team-based leadership today. Tiered delivery system will be the primary two. And we're also going to talk about the whole child and what that looks like at the secondary level, because it does look very, very different than it would say at an elementary level. Couple of updates from the 31A meeting. Parent and family and community engagement activities. There's a draft document that's kind of hanging out there from MDE regarding parent and family engagement. What's interesting is it goes all the way K-12, but I'm not 100% sure they had secondary representation. So if you are interested in seeing that document and would like to give maybe me some feedback so I could give MDE some feedback on the secondary components of that document, would love, love, love to do that for you. So if you are interested in getting access to that parent and community engagement document, just throw your name up in the chat and let me know that's what you want, and I'll be sure you get it. From the MyKIP standpoint, just a quick jump into what we completed with district teams on Monday. Monday was a very full day in the morning for our district teams. Hopefully some of that will be twinkling down to your buildings, but we talked a lot about communication, so that's why we're hoping it flows down. I'm also hoping that some information around what we're talking about today came down, or it's going to come down. That would be fantastic. But we talked a lot about that tiered system. Erin Sinkowski presented from our special education department, and then Amy Wasman presented on the whole child. So what we're going to go through today is, here's a snippet of what was talked about at the big training, but let's talk about what this looks like in the secondary world and what barriers you might come across, or how does it reflect on your current reality. Hold on one sec. Not all my chats popping up in my one space. Awesome. Okay. All right, so the first component of MTSS, we went over with you guys in our first meeting a little bit about team-based leadership. It's an active, organized, knowledgeable, and representative group, right, that exists to provide whole child, supports, remove barriers, coordinate, and evaluate activities across the system. Guess what? This team is your MTSS team. It is your, oh gosh, I'm losing my train of thought now. It's your MTSS.
Building leadership, school leadership. I got you.
Thank you, Angie. I was like having a groove going, right? And I was like, it is. It's everything combined. And what we find is, and I'm going to go to the next slide. Thank you for jumping in, Angie, is that we have a whole bunch of teams in our buildings. And I was just as guilty when I was a building principal. I had a school improvement team. I had a PBIS team. I had a culture and climate team. I had grade level teams. I'm trying to think what else. I know I had more than that. And I was a small middle school even.
If you could dream it, you had it, right?
Yeah, because anytime you start a new initiative, you need a team, was my philosophy, right? And I was an exceptionally small building. I think I had 12 staff members when I was at Freeland, not counting the high school staff. And so it was always, guess what? The same teachers that were volunteering on all these teams. And so what we're really focusing on is how many teams do you have and what does that look like? From the cascading team-based leadership model, and kind of what you're thinking about is we have our improvement team here at the ISD. And that team is multi-departmental. It's different levels that come together and talk about not only internal improvement, but also external for you guys. And so from there, that group designs what your district teams receive at those series, at that session that they went to on Monday, at those MyKit trainings. And so your district teams are multi-level, multi-faceted, right? And they should be focusing on everything that occurs at the district level. What we want you guys to kind of start to think about is in your buildings, right? You should have that one team that functions as the go-to, that really analyzes all of the data, talks about improvement, talks about MTSS, talks about literacy, talks about PBIS, talks about all these different components and how it fits in the picture of your building. Because what happens is if you don't have that team to ground you, like I've been in situations where I've had building principals who want to do this initiative. You have a teacher over here that wants to do this initiative. The bright, shiny yellow bus comes driving through and everybody wants to do that initiative. And without that core team making some of those basic decisions, it can get muddled, right? Angie, jump in if you have anything else before we go to the next slide.
I think right now you're doing an awesome job, but you think about those leadership teams and you also need to have people on those teams who are able to speak to the whole. I think about often, you would get with a grade level or a department level meeting and barriers would come up there and then they need to go somewhere. And sometimes it would fall in the lap of one person. But you really need to take it to that team so that team can help figure out what are the needs, because perhaps it's happening consistently across a building or across a department with those initiatives. So you might need follow-up supports and coaching, and what does that look like, and ensuring that that team is speaking. I'm going to start talking with my hands while driving because that's safe.
Yeah, please don't do that.
But just thinking about making sure that team is representative of and can really look big picture, and those processes are in place to know how to continue to allow those initiatives to flourish as opposed to fizzle.
Yes. And what I have found too is that's where the sustainability and the capacity building occurs. So for example, because of our design being both internal and external, if and when, say, our superintendent leaves and we hire a new superintendent, that team is driving those initiatives and understands our procedures and our policies that we've developed, right? And so that team then works with the superintendent to make sure they understand. Because I've been in situations, right, where new superintendents come in and are like, what's going on, this and that, and everybody kind of goes off into their own thing. It's really, really nice to have that system in place, because then the team's like, this is how we do business and this is where we're headed. And you then embrace the superintendent in, right? So there's lots of different ways. It's great at the building level too, because once you have that team in place, principals come and go. I love you all that are listening, but let's face it, guys, turnover is pretty big in education. And so that team, whether team members leave, whether it's the building leadership, whatever the situation is, really drives the focus and the vision for the building. And so that turnover is easier as a result, in theory. Okay, so here's what I want you guys to think about. How many different committees do you have at your building level? What is their purpose and who is represented? So what I'm gonna do is, I'm not gonna put you into breakout rooms. I'm just gonna give you guys a few minutes to think about it. If you're with other people, go ahead in a room, go ahead and have a conversation. If not, you can message people back and forth. You can text people, however you wanna do it. But what I want to do in about 2 minutes, I'm only going to give you 2 minutes, is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask that people unmute themselves and kind of share what their thoughts were on what we just discussed. So I'm going to set my timer here for 2 minutes, and then we'll go from there. So your assignment's on the board. If you're in a room with people, chit chat. If not, you can chat in the chat room, and I will take volunteers to speak up in 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes are up. So I'm going to ask any brave volunteers if they would like to share their group's thinking. What did you discuss? What were your thoughts before we move on? So I'll have about a minute of wait time, see if anybody unmutes themselves. Or if you want me to unmute you, just let me know. I can call you out too. Just throwing that out there. No one? You guys are testing my wait time. Okay. Well, I will mention that Reagan put in the chat room just how she's new at her district, and even in her building, and that there's a high turnover rate, and she has no idea. She has no idea what committees there are or how the system is even set up. And I'll be the first to tell you, at the ISD, I did an activity with our leadership where I had them write out our system, and they were all over the board. They didn't even know. Like, we had to start from the ground up with our leadership team even, because we had so many working committees and different groups and this and that we had to really think about it and do an audit and then realign. So last call. Does anybody else want to chime in?
This is where I'm going to jump in and express the importance of written procedures and writing things down. I know I beat that to no end, but for someone like Reagan who's just moving in, or anybody who transitions to a new district or a new position, or what's already existing and how does it function, that to me is critical to maintaining success and then driving forward. So you can see what's existing, and then how do we improve upon that if that's what's needed, and how do we celebrate what we're doing really, really well and share that amongst everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Angie. Last call for any of our participants. Shauna, in St. Charles, we are small. 16 teachers and only 6 teach in the middle school all day. The other 10 are shared staff. We really all are the committee. I feel you there. I completely understand how that works. Sometimes it's easier to get things done in a small school because of that dynamic, but then again, it's also really hard because then you can't change up the personalities, right? And you have to be very conscious of that. So definitely. Okay. So no matter of your size, just think about that team-based leadership and think about how it is really how it functions in regards to this model. We are going to be doing a lot of stuff as an ISD through that district improvement team. And so I want to make sure that it flows down to the building level, which is why we're meeting with you guys as a separate network to ensure that, you know, the conversation's there and you are flowing down to you and you guys understand the interconnections that are occurring. All right, so with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into MTSS component number 2, which is tiered delivery system. And this is what most people, I think, when they think of MTSS, this is all they think about in regards to that. We think about the pyramid, right? When we asked the MyKIP group on Monday, all the district level teams, to vision out what this would look like for if you had no barriers, right? And you could design what you wanted. And I was looking around the room and people were actually still pulling up that pyramid model. We also, and I'm just as guilty as most people, we would create the pyramid, right? And then it was academic, and then we split it in half. And on one side, we put academics, and on the other side, we put behavior, right? It goes beyond that. And that's why we're doing this portion of it with the whole child. But basically, you know, it's a responsive framework that provides instruction, interventions, and support intended to meet the needs of the whole child. So it's not just behavior and academics. It's a cycle, it's a model, it's a whole child component that we're going to kind of talk a little bit about today and what that would look like at the secondary level. Excuse me. Now, there are tiers because that's, you know, you have tiers of systems for your kiddos. The first being that you reach all learners, or each student has access and are able to learn, right? We've been talking forever, it seems like, that when MTSS and RTI, I'm even going to go back all the way back when it was RTI, when it came out and we all jumped on board, we began saying, we need interventions, we need interventions, we need interventions. And we became so intervention heavy that we neglected our tier 1. And that's why I see it all the time. I see a ton of schools with what I like to refer to as the upside down pyramid, right? Yes, Reagan, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint when I'm all done. I'll send it out with the recording. So you would get an upside down pyramid, and because we got so heavy onto the tiers. What we forget is that tier 2 is supplemental, right? It's those targeted interventions intended for some learners who require support, right? And this doesn't mean they have to be special ed, or they have to be English learners, or they have to be gifted and talented, right? Some general ed kids just need a little extra supplemental assistance to access the curriculum. And that can happen in the general ed classroom. It does not have to happen in some sort of pullout, right? So this tiered model kind of throws us off, and we got so heavy on that, the intervention component, right? And tier 3, supports provided intense individual interventions for few learners. I have seen maybe 1 or 2 different examples of this intense individualized intervention, but most school districts really struggle getting there because of the cost, time, qualified staff, which is really, really important when we're talking about tiered delivery systems. So when you are starting with that tier 1, a couple of things just to reflect upon in your own building. Are your instructional practices research-based and implemented with fidelity? Now, I thought I knew what fidelity was until we started really working on implementation science. I thought I did. Fidelity is really difficult to achieve. I'm just being very straightforward on that. You can have the best training in the world, but if you don't have coaching and you're truly changing adult behavior, you're not reaching fidelity. I've seen it over and over again. Districts will purchase a beautiful program. They'll offer 3 days training and then expect teachers to just go do it, right? Without that coaching piece, it doesn't happen. That fidelity really doesn't happen. And then the question is what measures do you use to even assess the fidelity to ensure that the tier 1 instruction is what it's supposed to be in the classroom? At the secondary level, this is really, really difficult to do. It's really difficult because of the lack of measurements. If you purchase a program, sometimes they have fidelity measurements that come with them. There are things out there like the school-wide PBIS tiered fidelity inventory that can measure it. There are things like the reading TFI, which is similar. So there are things out there that can measure fidelity. It's just, are you doing it? How often are you doing it as a building team, right? How many of your students are achieving desired outcomes for tier 1? Does your curriculum and supports at tier 1 address the needs of the whole child? Meaning, are they engaging? Are they supporting the child? Are they challenging the child? This is really hard to do. That tier 1 is really hard to do. And so what happens is we think we're doing it. And then for some reason, instead of just that, you know, very small percentage going into tier 2, all of a sudden we have 60% in tier 2. And so when you're looking at tier 2, you really got to think, is there a process that's developed and implemented consistently over time to identify which learners need additional support? When I was at Freeland, you know, when we started working on our MTSS model at the middle school, we didn't even have additional supports, which, you know, is very common at the secondary level. Like, what do those additional supports even look like? And so we created classes, right? Because that's what our master schedule tells us we have to do. We created a reading workshop class and a math support class, right? And then based off triangular of data, we would put kids into these support classes. The worst thing about these support classes is one was first hour and one was at the end of the day because of the way our master schedule was defined, right? Well, guess what? It may not have been a tier, or it may not have been a true issue with their skill set. Did they have an attendance issue? Was there a discipline issue? Was there something going on that by the end of the day they couldn't, there's so many things that go into these kids that just by looking at very basic triangular data of academic doesn't mean they need a support, right? So that's one way we're getting very heavy in tier 2. Another way to think of it is before I was putting kids in, like we would be selecting kids based on observational data and their assessments and things like that. I really should have been also taking a really close look at that tier 1 instruction a little bit closer. And I'm not talking educator evaluation here. I'm talking about pedagogy and core, good, solid instruction, and isn't meeting the needs of the child, right? How is tier 2 different than tier 1? What are supplemental supports you have in place? How does a student move in and out, right? So like, because so many of us are so tight on that master schedule and the way it works because of the way we have to qualify our staff and the curriculum we have to provide, that this becomes very, very difficult. in regards to what are the supplemental supports and how do they move in and out. So like we had to have a kit, like if a kid would needed reading support, if we identified them for reading support, then they had to go in there for the marking period or the semester because of the way our grading system worked in Skyward. And so even if they didn't need it, there's, you know, it just created a lot of struggles with that flow pattern. And then finally stepping into tier 3, that intensive supports, data-driven, research-based, how are students responding? What does your data say? I'll be honest with you in saying we never got past those support classes in any of the secondary schools that I worked in. Saw very little movement in this tier 3 for what our students actually needed. And that's just from an academic standpoint. We weren't even touching the behavior in the whole child and some of those very mental health basic components, right, in this system. That was just the academics. So there's a lot of struggles in the secondary world, and it's one of those things where this is a great model. And notice that when you read this, there's nothing in here that says they have to have 30 minutes of math, additional instruction, you know, 90 minutes of additional reading or literacy instruction. It has to do with how are you supporting the kids? How are you engaging the kids? How are you challenging the kids, right? How are you keeping them safe? How are you keeping them healthy? And if you're not accomplishing that in tier 1, is it a tier 1 problem, or do they need additional supports, and how do they move in and out? So keep that in the back of your mind as we're kind of going through some of these system pieces. Here's some data for you. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back here. Angie, did you want to add anything on the tiered system before I go into the data?
I just keep coming back to every child, right? Tier 1, you are leveraging those high yielding practices, what the high leverage practices. What is it you're doing in every classroom for every child so that they are engaged, that they are getting what they need, they're supported. I keep falling back on that tier 1. We can't intervene ourselves out of a box. Like, you can't provide an intervention for an intervention for an intervention. So what are we doing currently in every classroom? Are we utilizing disciplinary literacy essentials? Do we need to be trained and coached on that? Do we need to have additional supports? Do we need to focus on one and do one really, really, really well? Mm-hmm. What is it we're looking at? What's the student data that we're collecting? What's the adult behavior that we're examining? And again, I go back to, just like Rebecca said, it's not about the teacher evaluation. It's just that observational, like, what is it our kids need, and how are we meeting those needs? Sorry.
Thank you. When you're thinking about it, like, I know a lot of us have support classes, designated time to work on skill sets. And not only do you have to think about how kids are going in there, but what are they receiving once they're in there, right? That's that research-based fidelity piece, because I just remember being so frustrated because there's a lack of curriculum out there for really working on skill sets, like literacy and mathematical skill sets with students at secondary level. And it's because by that age point, by that time period, it's not necessarily additional math that's going to help them. It's how can you engage them in the tier 1 curriculum a little bit further? What supports do they need outside of that world? And so we'll head there in just a minute. But when we're looking at it, oh goodness gracious, statewide. So when we're looking at data and we're thinking about, for example, students with IEPs, this was shared with MyKIP, the MyKIP teams, the district improvement teams, on Monday in regards to keeping in mind those special education students and your English learners and your gifted and talented when we're talking about this tiered system. I think a lot of times we automatically think this is special education, this is general education. We don't think about English learners. We don't think about gifted and talented. We kind of forget about those groups. But when you're looking at data, this is just students with IEPs, for example. Percentage of 8th grade students, I'm right here, 8th grade students with IEPs scoring proficient in statewide assessment in English language arts is at 25.8%. When we're talking about math, they're at 19.2. Okay. We also have we take a close look at existing data elements. in regard, or exiting, excuse me, in regards to those diploma pieces. And one of the things from a secondary viewpoint that we need to keep in mind is, what are we really preparing students for and how do we get them there? And it's not all college bound. It's not all career bound. It could be a mix of both. And so thinking about where we are at in regards to our data here and these performance measurements. And then this is the one that really catches my eye. Aaron Sikowski shared this with us in regards to the blue line being the dropout rate, the four-year high school dropout rate, and the orangey type yellowish line is the four-year high school graduation rate. And then at the bottom, it tells you how many suspensions, right? Look at that correlation. I mean, it couldn't get any clearer. You don't need to do any data digging here in regards to the fact that when we're talking whole child, when we're talking about discipline, when we're talking about behavior, when we're thinking about all those pieces that go into, it has a direct correlation. 4 more suspensions, look at that. Increase in dropout and decrease in graduation rate. It's pretty straightforward. And so this is what kind of drives our work at the secondary MTSS world when you're thinking about how can we help these kiddos. And so what we're going to do is, at our last Zoom meeting, we had you think about where you guys felt you were at your building level with MTSS. What student study data is, and then we also wanted you to think about what student study data was collected, what was done with the information, who can access the information that's collected. So thinking about your team, do the right people have access to the information? What we're going to do is, and I'm going to give you some logistical things, so hang on. We're going to do a breakout activity. I'm actually going to break you out into rooms here in a second, where you're going to literally get sucked into a breakout room to have conversations. So when you go into that breakout room, you're going to want to unmute yourself. Let me see how many participants I have. I think I have like 10 of you. Some of you are in groups. So we're just going to do 2 rooms. I'm going to suck you guys into 2 rooms. And in that room, I want you to think about the data I shared, thinking about where you guys feel you're currently at, and what is your current reality around tiered systems, right? And how your data reflects that. So we're just going to have a general conversation. I am going to ask that you take notes. So and I actually can get rid of some of in the agenda, there's a link where if you click on it, it'll take you to this document. And I'm actually going to reduce the number of boxes because I'm going to suck you into 2 groups here. So give me a sec. There we go. So for this first breakout, you are going to, there'll be group 1 and group 2. I'm just going to ask that you take notes of your conversation. I'm going to give you guys about 10 minutes to have this conversation, about 10, 15 minutes, and then I'm going to suck you back, if that makes sense. What questions might you have about your instructions? Okay, the link for note taking, you'll have to designate a note taker for your group, is in the agenda for this activity. I want you talking about data, how you measure yourself on the practice profile, and then your current reality. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and suck you up into some breakout rooms. All right. So there'll be about 4 to 5 participants per room. All right. Let's see. If there's an issue, just message me. But there you go. If you are still hearing me, you need to accept the invite to join your room and then unmute yourself. So have fun.
There was like a natural pause in our breakout room. Like Vicky had just finished a sentence, but I still like that conversation could have kept going.
Gotcha.
And I pulled over. I'm at a rest stop, so now I can see people.
Well, that's kind of fun.
It is.
All right. So everybody is back in the room, into the main room now, and I'm recording again. I see group 2 took plenty of notes, so thank you very much. I like seeing all those notes, and that gives us kind of an idea of where you're at, and hopefully you found the conversation to be beneficial. Angie, what did you hear in your room?
We took no notes.
That's what I told Angie. I'm like, we took no notes. We talked a lot.
We did. We talked a lot, and it was good conversation.
Okay.
Just some of the things that they're doing at White Pine. When you're looking at a student, it's not just about the number that they're producing on NWEA, right? You're using that observational data from student conversations, and then if you need to drill in further, again, I have a middle school son at home, so thinking about can't versus won't. And that apathy that middle schoolers have, and I assume, and my day is coming, right? It'll be here soon, that my high schooler will probably be in that can't versus won't mentality still too. So we talked a lot about that. We talked about what we're currently doing with MTSS structures and how we figure out what needs to be provided to students. So perhaps one of us will go in and fill out some notes in a little bit.
Any other chime-ins from group 1? Oh, they're so quiet now.
I think she covered it. That's what we talked about.
All right. Sounds good. Does anybody want to add from group 2? From room 2, I should say.
Somebody tell us what happened in room 2.
I know. Room 2 took a lot of notes.
Oh, they were talking via
Oh, so there's a lot of notes. Everybody can access the notes as well, so you can kind of see. But what we really wanted to do was kind of think about, okay, where are we currently at with MTSS in our buildings and in our county at the secondary level? I struggled. I don't know. One of the questions when Freeland hired me was, what does MTSS look like at the secondary level? And many, many moons ago, I said it then, I'm like, I don't think a good model exists, right? I think that we're trying to take that elementary world and pigeonhole it into a secondary world, and it's really difficult to do that. And I think that's where we're at, is we know we have to have this. We know we have to provide those supports and things along those lines, but how does it work in our current model is
right.
Right? So one of the ways that we recommend taking a look at it is through the whole child tenets. And so the whole child's being thrown out there a ton. It's almost become its own buzzword. And I will see write-ups. I kid you not, guys. I will see write-ups that say MTSS whole child continue, all like in one pocket, just because that's what everybody's talking about. And so Monday when we met with the district improvement teams, and then with you guys today, just so everybody knows when we're talking about whole child, what exactly we are talking about. And that is this idea of the 5 tenets. Amy has provided some of the instruction around the 5 tenets, but I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go over what these are and kind of how we process them. The first one is each student enters school healthy and learns about and practices a healthy lifestyle. What's fascinating about this one from my secondary mindset and where I go is right now the Michigan Merit Curriculum only requires 0.5 health, 0.5 PE, right? And even now, legislators are looking at bills that eliminate that completely. So it's really hard to hit this tenet if a kid's not in sports, for example, and you're taking away the requirements around PE and health, because then what are we going to start cutting because of finances and because of numbers, right? So it's all like this interacting, and it's all the system that comes together. And so this idea that students are healthy when they arrive, they got plenty of sleep, which is very difficult for teenagers in this world because most of us start at what time? Right? So we start super, super early. When the research tells us to start later, we ignore the research and we keep those early start dates because of other barriers, because of other things we have going on. We know that our teenagers are spending too much time on their mobile devices, right? So do we, though. So we're not the best role models. But it's rather than taking away these devices, how do we teach them to use them appropriately and monitor their time and their use, right? When we're talking about practices of healthy lifestyles and long-term sustainability, my hometown where I went to school, they had like a lifetime fitness course. Well, we jazzercised every day. Love jazzercising, don't get me wrong, but it didn't really teach me how to do time management as an adult, or how to make healthier choices with my food intake, or if I sit all day with my job, how do I build in time for exercise, right? Like some of those things. So when we're talking about whole child, and it's also mental health, it's not just physical health. It's the mental health practices and how you process your emotions and how you handle, how you have anger management and how you deal with constructive criticism and things along those lines. When we get to the next tenet, each student learns in an environment that is physically and emotionally safe for students and adults. One thing you're going to know about these tenets when you're thinking about MTSS too is oftentimes we are super hyper focused on the students, but then we fall into this trap of forgetting about our staff. Happens all the time. Your staff have to be physically and emotionally safe as well. They have to feel supported and protected and know that they're not going to have any issues to really teach well. And so creating an environment that works for your students and adults for the setting.
Can I interject real quick? Don't forget that you are all a part of the staff too. So administrators, don't feel like you need to own that all by yourself and nobody's checking in on you. You've got to take care of you as well. And I think often as leaders, that's forgotten. We do a nice job of preaching, but we do a terrible job of practicing.
We do, I will give you that. And so when you're thinking of the safe environment, it's physical, it's emotional, it's that mental health piece. These are things where like the PBIS gets built in, the different tiers of supports in that area. We have some schools piloting mental health practitioners and defining what this environment would look like for students and helping schools recreate their systems around this. So when you're thinking about your current high school or middle school, walk through every classroom, walk through every restroom. Is it clean? Is it inviting? Is it physically and emotionally safe for students? The next one, each student is actively engaged in learning and is connected to the school and the broader community. Don't forget that broader community piece. So when we're talking about engaged, we're really talking about tier 1 instruction here. That's one way. It's also relationships with your staff. That's key. It's very, very key that they have relationships with your staff in order to be engaged. I find that a lot of secondary teachers are very direct instruction based. Some build amazing relationship with kids, others do not. They feel themselves as the content givers, right? And so working with staff to make sure that they have that built relationship, but also engaging them, creating instruction that pulls the student in. When we're talking about tiered systems and when you're thinking about the secondary world in this area, a couple things to think about are, you know, if you walk into a classroom, are the desks all in rows and the teacher's giving direct instruction? What is the engagement level there? I've walked into 2 bio classes at this teaching 2 different teachers. One teacher has all the kids in rows and is providing direct instruction using PowerPoint, right? Go into the next classroom and all the kids are up, they're talking, they're problem solving, they're taking a look at information and digesting it. 2 very different ways to present the content and present the learning, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. It's also when you're talking about engagement, you're talking about what pace is the instruction going at? What does that look like? And because what we have a tendency to do is think of our instruction at the secondary world as a moment of time versus content. versus competency-based, right? So it's about having to get through this many standards by marking period 1, having to get through this many standards by marking period 2. Here's the test. Yep, they learned it, they did not, we move on, right? Clearly there's some disconnect there in thinking outside of the box and engaging students at their own pace. So it may take kid a full year to get through Algebra 1. It may take a kid 6 weeks to get through Algebra 1. Like, what is their skill set and are we meeting it? When you're thinking about those engagements. So it's best practice, it's relationships, and it's also your approach to the content. Each student has access to personalized learning and is supported by qualified caring adults. This is where it gets tricky for us in the secondary world because of the way teachers are qualified, right? So I am secondary trained. I was trained to be a content master. The content came first, the pedagogy came second, right? So a lot of it was focused on 40 acres and a mule as a history major, and versus the best way to give that information to students, the best way to have them learn and its importance, right? When we're talking about supported by qualified caring adults, it goes back to that idea that teachers are properly trained and they care about the kids and you have created that environment. So you're gonna see, that's why it's a circle, because a lot of these overlap. But when you're thinking about students and you're thinking about your secondary world and this idea of personalized learning, this is where the master schedule can create some massive barriers for us in regards to that personalized learning. This is that tier 2, those tier 3s. How are you supporting them emotionally at a tier 2 level? How are you supporting them physically, mentally? How are you meeting their instructional needs? How are you meeting that advanced instructional need? And it's really hard to do that with a 50-hour block and they're switching classes. It's really hard to build those relationships with teachers, right? It's really because one teacher wants this and the next. And if you have ever shadowed your students during the day, you will see it. I had teachers do that one time. I've done it myself. And the biggest thing that they told me was, nobody called me up by name and I'm exhausted because everybody wanted something different and I sat all day. And so really kind of taking a hyper lens at your culture around this idea of supported and what supported means. This does not mean, you know, because the student is struggling in math, we're going to put them in a math support class that teaches basic foundational skills or gives them extra time to work on their homework, right? So thinking about what that supported piece looks like. And then finally, each student is challenged academically and prepared for success in college or further study and for employment and participation in the global environment. This is my favorite. I'm sorry, guys, this is my favorite. So the reason why is I think when we get really caught up in the SAT and the PSAT, because that's really one of our only solid assessments when we're talking data, achievement data, that's really one of the only solid assessments that we have to really drive some of these decisions. But there's so much more out there. And when you think about it, I have some resources for you guys, and I can't wait to share you in this area. But when you're challenging students academically and preparing them, it's not just about every kid going to college. It's not about, you know, this kid's not going to make it, so it is what it is. It's one of those things where you really take the student from where they're at and where they're coming to you, and you help drive them in the right direction and make sure they have the skill sets they need. This is where the MMC gets in the way, though, right? This is where that's a barrier for us sometimes, is the explicitness of the MMC and how the Michigan Merit Curriculum kind of bogs this process down. It doesn't give us the creative flexibility that we need sometimes with our students to achieve this one. This is where CTE comes into play pretty heavy too, and what opportunities you're giving kids for CTE and really expressing themselves or exploring who they are and what direction they're going in. Angie, anything else to add before I flip slides? She got quiet. She's never quiet.
I muted myself and then I shook my head and it was all good. I was just thinking about those kiddos. Like, challenge doesn't necessarily mean academic challenge for your gifted and talented, for your students who excel. It's your students who, again, you mentioned CTE. You think about those students who are hands-on and they love to get in and figure things out, and perhaps they need opportunities to explore different careers that are out there, to challenge them, to engage them, to excite, like, I don't know, not everybody, right? I struggle to sit. I sat through training today. I'm sitting right now. I pulled over because it's safer, but because I talk with my hands and I need to see your faces too. It's hard to just sit all day. It's exhausting to do that. As adults, we hate it, right? Mm-hmm. But yet the majority of our secondary students, because of a master schedule bell structure, what do they have to do all day long?
Right. Right. So with that being said, right? Hey, that's not the right activity. Oh no. Oh, I didn't put the right activity on here. You guys are not going to talk about data discussion and current reality in this next breakout. I am going to break you out into rooms though. I'm going to change this right now. Gotta fix this. What I want you guys to do is, in a perfect world, and we did this with the district teams too, but I want you to think about it at a secondary level, right? In a perfect world, what would you want your dream high school to look like for your kids? What would you want your middle school to look like for your kids in a dream world? No barriers, absolutely no barriers. You could do what you want. No money barriers, no time barriers, no staffing barriers, nothing. What would you do for your kids?
Dream big.
Yeah, think big, right? I'm going to go all Rachel Hollis on you guys. For those of you who know who Rachel Hollis is, you're going with your vision, the best you. Like, if you could think outside the box and do anything you could possibly do, what would that dream vision look like? So I am going to break you up into rooms. Again, one more time, just last time we're going to break you up into the room. And using the same documents for note-taking, right? I'm just going to do 2 groups again. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those rows. So just
whoever's in my group, take notes.
Yeah, because Angie's driving. But you're going to go ahead and just take your notes down here. So yeah, what does this look like at the secondary level? When you're thinking about whole child, when you're thinking about MTSS and in a dream world, no barriers, think big, the best version of your high school, the best version of the middle school, what is it going to look like, right? So that's your assignment. So I'm going to break you out into your rooms. We're going to do 2 rooms again.
If they're a little imbalanced.
They are a little imbalanced. So I will
Rebecca?
Yeah.
This is Carolyn, and I am going to be logging off to hit the pool in just a little bit. So I don't know if you want to put me in a certain group or not. I can stay on as long as I can, but I'll be leaving in about 5 minutes.
Okay, I will leave you in that group. And what I did is I broke up the township groups. So I broke them up. So that'll work. Okay. Now that I got the rooms organized, I'm going to put you in for about 10 minutes, and then I'll give you a 2-minute warning like I did last time. All right. So have fun, dream big, the best version. Go.
Home.
You stopped us at a good point again, Miss Rebecca.
Yes.
I said you stopped us at a good point. Our
Oh,
conversation, though, maybe I should have said at a bad point because we were so engaged.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I know. Gotta be conscious of time.
I know.
All right. Well, so welcome back, everybody. I'm hoping that you guys are finding these breakout rooms helpful in your conversations. I have fun because I get to watch like both groups talk and kind of what you have going back and forth when you take notes like that. So very cool. So thank you. So when I'm thinking heavily about MTSS, right? And when I am envisioning what I would love every high school and middle school to look like, a lot of my thought process has tendency to fall in the engaged, supported, and challenged areas, kind of like I said earlier. And so I thought, when I'm watching you guys, I'm loving your brainstorming here because I think there's power in this group. I think there's power for us to really define what this could look like in the secondary world and really be role models and model this, because I had my own visioning activity and I was thinking really big. And in a dream world, I would have students that would leave middle school with a solid EDP. So this is high school focused. I will be the first to admit I was a middle school principal. And so I apologize for my middle school peeps right now because this is pretty high school focused. But I think at the middle school level, it's a lot about exposure and that grade level teams and coming together as grade level teams and creating that culture and really doing a lot of work with our middle schoolers around social emotional pieces and mental health support. And then I was thinking, what would if I had a dream middle school and then sent them up to the high school, right? What would my dream high school look like? And so this is kind of where I went with that. So they would come into a freshman academy to ensure that their EDP is correct and assess additional skills, right? So we would do some assessing of our kiddos around there are actually tools out there to do social emotional learning and soft skills. And so we would utilize some of those assessments, but really focus hard on that social emotional skill set of our kids as well as soft skills. One of the biggest things that keeps coming out in our soft skills world or in our CTE world is that kids don't have soft skills. And what they mean by soft skills is being able to persevere through a difficult project or learn something new, right? It's a matter of even learning how to communicate properly on the phone, right? Some of those basic skills because of things like this, these devices, our mobile devices, that are creating a new culture of workforce for them. So it's a combination of social emotional learning and soft skills in that freshman academy, right? And really working hard on those EDPs and continue that career exploration. Then that sophomore year, they would start to, I don't want to call them tracks, they're not tracks. I prefer pathways, right? But they would start to, and I think somebody put that on their notes. I thought I saw that somewhere. So chime in if you're with me on this. Yeah. I see it. CTE track options, college track, right? Like these avenues for kids. And basically super hyper focused on that career exploration and potentially go to early college if they're ready for it and really have our high school set up for competency-based education. Now, if you're not familiar with competency-based education, I got a book for y'all. And I can buy copies if there's interest. So you really understand how this works, but it's really destroying that master schedule concept. And one sec. Let me mute Andy real quick. It's really focused on that breaking down the master schedule concept and letting kids learn at their pace. And it's all about mastery versus grades, which really freaks parents out, but it's awesome stuff. That junior year, they would jump into the career complex, the early college, or stay put with that competency base that senior year, and then you can see that plus 1 year if they're in early college. So middle school would be really preparatory and really focused on social emotional supports and that foundation of learning for learning and not just for grades. And really working with parents to understand that before they hit that high school world that would then be designed like this. Like that's just where my brain looks at. And as I'm looking at your guys's, it's along some of those same lines, right? Like I love utilizing parents and community partners to guide that exploration, right? Business partners in the CTE world are so important in this. More student-centered choices as to learning needs. That came out of group 1. And one of the resources I'll share with you too is this book called Empower. So Aaron Shippert gave me this book to read. I'm not 100% done with it. I'm like in the last couple chapters, but it's all about kids when they own their own learning and the engagement process that comes into play with that. Career Quest at SVSU is huge. And part of this, mental health supports, starting at a later time, like we need to start at a later time. Yeah, so I noticed group 2 was talking a lot about vapes. We were talking about vaping as well and how it's hitting middle school world and high school. And like, that's an important conversation to have in this, right? Because we're also talking whole child. That's healthy, that's safe. And when you have things like vaping going on, that deters from our dream world. So how do we fix that for these kids, right? So that's, I actually, while you guys were in your break room talking, I was out talking to Amy about like reading your notes and like, how can we help with this vaping situation more than what we're already doing? You know what I mean? So that was really good feedback for us to take a look at. And so when we think about what our high schools and middle schools could be versus where they're really at, if we're honest with ourselves, we do have a long way to go. And there's barriers, right? One of the most common barriers is this. It's the master schedule. I've done a lot of research on master schedule. I have a membership to a great website in regards to master scheduling and what that could look like. But the fact of the matter is, to achieve our dream, we have to start tackling some of those barriers that we have going on in regards to the master schedule. And another big barrier are the way we qualify our teachers, right? Some of those endorsement challenges that we face. Another barrier is the explicitness of the MMC. Like, I could go on and on and on with some of the barriers that we have here. The lack of quality assessments, the lack of, trying to think what else, like I could go on. But I thought I would spend some time a little bit on the master schedule. So I've done a lot of master scheduling in my lifetime, in my career, for both high school and middle school levels. And I just think that we need to start thinking outside of the box here. And I found articles to back me up on this, right? So when I send this out, and I think I put them in the agenda as well. So let me double check. Yep, they're all in the agenda. I have articles for you guys to read. So there's 3 articles for you guys to read for our next session in January. And then I also linked Off the Clock. This is a really good book about competency-based education. Like I said, I have a copy if you want to borrow it. If you want me to buy it, it's not expensive. But it's about how you really focus on getting rid of that butts and seats and that time and those semesters and those marking periods and some of those confining constraints and the bells to get to a point where the time is no longer a barrier of your master schedule. And this is a really, really good book. Another really good book about kind of thinking outside of the box when we're talking about education is Divergent EDU. This is a relatively new book. What's that? I did a book study with the author. She's pretty cool. But it's all about how we harness the power of time and technology to really push our kids to the educational limits in the secondary world. It's very powerful. What I like about this book is, hold on, let me pull this up. What I like about Off the Clock is Off the Clock actually gives you a case study of an entire state. An entire state that went to this model. So they had legislation behind them, right? They had, I think it's New Hampshire. Yeah, state of New Hampshire. They had the legislators behind them, and there was some big changes, right? What I like about Divergent EDU is it talks about your staff, right? So let's face it, we're all adults, and sometimes adult behaviors can get in the way of transformational ideas or thinking outside the box because we're very ingrained in our way. And I think someone even put coaching on their notes from their group. This book talks about how to build a culture of trust and how to build that culture and climate to create that innovative thinking to make the changes that you need to make. So love that book. So that's an option as well. And then I also put in here Empowered. Like I said, this is the one that Aaron Shipper gave me. And what I love this book is that this is to own their own thinking and learning and what processes you have to take place and things you need to do with kids. Because here's the thing, you can't just throw them in and say, here, do your own learning, right? You have to facilitate that process. And I think that's one of the barriers. And you have to build time in the master schedule to do this and really create a culture that allows your teachers to do this. And so I think when we're thinking about barriers to our dream world, we could go on, right? Master schedule, teaching unions, you know, there's a lot out there that hinders it. But if we can start to chip away at some of those barriers and start to really think outside the box on how we could get there, I think we can make a lot of movement, especially with this group. I love this group. You guys are great. So what I like about the collection of books that I've recently read on some of this and over the years is you have legislation and policy and how to get over that barrier. You have staff challenges and how to get over that barrier, right? And then you have student barriers and how to create that culture. So a wealth of resources. When we're talking about these books, I'd be happy to purchase them for you, to kind of do a book study. If anybody's interested, we can do a vote on which one we want to read first as a group, and I can purchase them for the group. So that will be part of the follow-up email. So here's kind of your homework when you're thinking about that dream world and that secondary MTSS whole child vision that you have is, how is the master schedule creating barriers around that? That's one thing I want you to look at between now and when we meet in January. Take a look at your master schedule. What are the barriers and how can you get around some of those barriers? So start thinking about action planning, right? And start thinking about how you can modify that. Your third piece of homework is to read Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, because we're going to talk about them when you come back. The first article is by Mindshift, and it's called the rotationary model. This is a way you can design your master schedule to really focus on teacher relationships and skill sets. It's really interesting. Article 2 is by EdWeb, and it's about the $10 million magnet board, right? We all know the magnet board and the teacher names and the courses, and you're moving them around. And then Article 3 is talking about how the schedule won't let us devote time to intervention, right? So getting through that barrier and stop using that as a crutch and start thinking outside of the box with that master schedule. So those are 3 articles to read. And then think about which book you would be interested in doing a book study in. I'm not saying we would do a book study right away. I think summertime is a better time to catch people, you know, maybe not right before January, end of semester, and then you get ready for testing and all that craziness. So we'll figure out a time. I'm not going to throw that to you right away, but think about and research which book you think you'd be interested in. So you have 3 pieces of homework. Once again, take a look at your master schedule and how it's creating a barrier to your dream version of your building. Read the 3 articles and then pick which book you think you'd be most interested in. So that is your homework. And I think that's all I have. Angie, do you have anything you want to add?
I think I'm good. Just remember, everybody, that break is coming, and take care of you. Lisa put that in the chat, and it's incredibly important to remember. And that we're not meeting again until the end of January, so don't pressure yourself to get this read in between the holidays. Give yourself permission to check out and take care of you.
Good point. I always forget that. Thank you, Angie. I guess my final thought on all of this is, and just some logistical things, is we are meeting January 23rd. That's actually the exact same day as continuous improvement session with all the district teams. So it's going to be overlapping. So we're going to still meet from 2 to 4 as a network on that day. It's going to be face-to-face together. And so those people who are attending the continuous improvement session will be pulled out. And then if you don't attend that session, you can just come and meet your team here. Because we're going to do that on site. And we're going to start talking about data at the secondary level, early warning systems, all that good jazz. And we're also going to start talking about barrier busting, master schedules, teaching staff, redesigning our thought process and tackling some of these things, the Michigan Merit Curriculum. So we're going to be building all of that into our conversation when we meet on January 23rd from 2 to 4. And so, and I gave you kind of your information as to what you need to take a look at. And then what we're going to do is, following this, is I'll send out the recording of the webinar. I paused the recording during your breakout, so there's no dead air. You'll get a copy of the presentation, and you'll get copies of all of this stuff too. the articles and things like that in an email. So that will be coming. And I think that's all I got. Does anybody from the group have anything they want to add before we sign off? You can throw it in the chat room, or you can just go ahead and unmute.
Just want to say, everybody have a great holiday, and we'll look forward to more discussions in the new year.
Great discussions.
Yay! I'm glad it went well. Anybody else?
I hit muted us.
We can see your eyes now, Angie. Right?
It's funny. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Like I said, I appreciate all of you for participating. I would also like some feedback if you have any thoughts about how this session went. We try not to do a whole lot via Zoom. We like face-to-face, but we also know how hard it is to get out of your buildings. And so if you liked this format and you were okay with it as a blended way of learning, just let me know or send me an email. And with that, happy holidays, everybody. Enjoy your break.
Bye, everyone.